Some characters are better left alone. The Coen Brothers created a legend, and then John Turturro, well, he accidentally killed it. This is a film that John Turturro made as a passion project due to the success of the Big Lebowski. But the execution of this film really needed a lot more effort to be put into multiple elements of the film, such as the script, or research into how a Cuban character speaks, and overall just realizing that maybe giving one of the smaller characters of the Big Lebowski his own film may just not have been the right move to preserve that film's legacy. What made Jesus Quintana work wasn't the depth, it wasn't the character development, it was the mystery. And the second you try to explain the mystery, it all disappears. Before I get into the video, please consider pressing that like button, subscribing to my channel, and posting a comment below with your own thoughts on the film if you've seen it. Also, please consider joining our Discord. The link is in the description below. The story revolves around Cuban-American Jesus Quintana, or as said in the film, Quintana, as he's released from prison following a short sentence for exposing himself to a kid while peeing. And almost instantaneously, he proceeds to resume his life of bad decisions and crime, which leads to the results of the bad decisions piling onto one another just like you'd expect they would. And I guess it's what a film where the central focus is a crime-seeking scoundrel like Jesus Quintana would take us. Along the way, we see various familiar faces that have worked with John Turturro and the Coen Brothers for years, and also those that are assumingly just big fans of the Big Lebowski that wanted to take place in a film involving his characters. Some of the most notable that really stuck out to me are Michael Battaluccio, who plays George Babyface Nelson from Our Brother Where Art Thou, Tim Blake Nelson, who plays Delmar in Oh Brother Where Art Thou, J.B. Smoove, who plays Leon Black on Curb Your Enthusiasm, Bobby Cannavale, Pete Davidson, John Hamm, Christopher Walken, and Susan Sarandon. With a cast that stacked, you'd think you'd be in for an excellent film. But I think that after watching it, it proves to be more of a testament as to how well liked that both the Big Lebowski and John Turturro are even this many years later. Now this is no masterpiece by any means, and it has a lot of flaws that I'm going to get into. But I do want to get one thing out of the way, and that's that this was never going to be a masterpiece the same as the Big Lebowski was. The truth is that the odds were stacked against it from the beginning due to the lack of the involvement from the Coen Brothers, and also the fact that it was written and directed by Turturro himself, who doesn't really have anything all that impressive in his repertoire as far as writing and directing goes. Now, as far as John Turturro's directorial and writing career goes, just about everything he's done has just about as lackluster of ratings as Jesus Roll does, or rather should. But truthfully, I do believe this film is taking a much bigger hit due to not living up to the expectations established by his predecessor. Now, I do think in the long run, the bigger mistake was also pursuing a character such as Jesus Quintana. What made the original work so well was that there were so many small, memorable characters. Not that we were depending on one big character and a few other characters that just weren't as memorable in order to carry the movie. The reality is that the majority of these characters really aren't that deep and memorable. The majority of the writing just honestly feels pretty bland, and just not all that compelling to tell you the truth. The biggest reason for this film feeling so out of place in its writing is that many of the story beats come from the 1974 French film Going Places, which is probably the creative decision that doomed this film for me since the story's backbone is taken from that film, and it isn't really what I would think of when someone suggests to give Jesus his own film. I can't really remember many moments of the film that really stuck out to me as really interesting. I'm sure this has probably been said before by some other reviewers at some point, but I feel like that us as the audience are really in the same boat as the character Marie when she's really bored having sex, but she does it anyway. We as the audience are really bored watching this film, but yet, for some reason, we watch it anyway. I guess just to say that we saw it. Later on, when Marie is freaking out in frustration over not being kissed, I feel like that's how we as an audience are. We're watching a film that we know is trash, and it's just completely ignoring our needs. Just like how Petey and Jesus are ignoring her needs. Now let's talk about Jesus really quick, and really discuss the elephant in the room. I do really feel like that Jesus isn't a bad character, and John Turturro, he really has the Coens to thank for developing that character. But the bigger issue becomes that at the end of the day, a Cuban character probably requires a Cuban actor. Because I tell you, John Turturro, he really isn't Al Pacino when it comes to portraying a Cuban. To be honest, a lot of the pronunciation of the Spanish words, it's not done all that convincingly, and it would honestly make a lot more sense if he were portraying an Italian. Considering the character was created in the 90s, I'm pretty forgiving when it comes to him not actually being an authentic Cuban, And the argument of, he doesn't have to be Cuban, he's an actor, let him act Cuban. But in order for that argument to make any sense, it's really got to imply that the actor's going to pull the role off, which I really think is the bigger issue. That his performance as Jesus, it just isn't very good. Now, because this really isn't that serious of a film, that probably is a part of some satirical element that's just going over my head. But it really does feel more like he's just trying to act convincingly Cuban but failing. It's also very possible that the bigger issue is that Turturro shouldn't have been the person directing the film, and that there really should have been someone on the outside that could have confidently told him how he could have been improving. Not to mention too that the film probably needs someone who can improve the viewer engagement, like maybe rewriting the script in their own voice. I know that Turturro loves the story and he wanted to do it himself, but after a point, it really should be obvious that someone who could really do the film justice should be the bigger priority over someone's love for it. The story itself just feels like there's a lot that it does wrong that someone else could have just maneuvered a lot better than John Turturro could. And it's a shame that we didn't live in that universe where someone besides him took it upon themselves to revive the character. Now, he's not a Coen brother, but when someone takes on a project like that, I think it's best to realize that to maintain the legacy of the character, it's probably best to not get experimental when you decide to further the story. At the very least, they shouldn't have completely changed the vibes of the film. This one feels more like a drama, even though it's coming from what's considered to be one of the funniest films of all time by many people. Whether that's intentional or is just Turturro not really being the guy to trust when it comes to writing a comedic script, I think it was a mistake to let this film go on this way. And also, the way this film just introduces character after character is really one of the biggest reasons as to why us as an audience don't really feel attached to this one, and they ultimately just end up feeling one-dimensional. At the end of the day, they just seem to be giving Jesus and Petey a means of lengthening the story, and showing how they'd react in bland situation after bland situation, instead of doing something a little more interesting, like maybe putting them in some sort of big planned heist or something. Even the climax of the film feels a little bit too anticlimactic, by having Jesus and Petey both being accomplices in a murder that they barely even took part in, followed by a car crash that puts him hitchhiking while running from the police. I will at least say that there were way worse ways to end this film though, so I do respect him for that. It at least does feel a little bit satisfying in its own way, and Turturro does seem to close the book on Jesus, since the ending will be his third strike and he will likely end up living the rest of his days out in prison. I guess what I'm saying here is that this film suffers from a lot of things, like poor writing, poor story choices, and overall just a lack of identity designed to check on this character, and also to play on nostalgia to do it. As much as I always loved the idea of seeing how a legendary character from the past transitions to the modern day, this film serves as an example that sometimes, no matter how desperate we as an audience are, it should take a lot more than just the actor that portrays him to bring him back. Like we really needed to have the Coen Brothers' involvement in one way or another in order to really have any sort of chance of replicating the success of the Big Lebowski. And it just goes to show that that film is a one in a million that we'll never see the likes of again. Jesus worked because he was lightning in a bottle, and lightning doesn't strike twice, especially when you try to bottle it yourself. Remember that if you enjoyed watching this video, press the like button, subscribe, and post your thoughts below. Also consider joining our Discord using the link in the description below in order to continue talking about movies and filmmaking. And finally, feel free to press on one of the videos you see on the screen in front of you to see more film related content just like this. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.